Hi, welcome everybody. I'm Mary Mann. I manage the college archives here at the Cooper Union for the advancement of science and art. And it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to our historic Great Hall for On the Eve of May Day, Labor Then and Now. Why do I say historic? Well, you saw the video, but there's so much to cover that it's barely able to touch the surface of the union and labor activities that have taken place here. There's been so many different union meetings in this building over so many years that trying to explain just that small part of our history would be really overwhelming and frankly boring for you guys. So I've only got a couple minutes anyway. As an archivist, I can't resist though, so I'm going to tell you briefly about a single movement that united workers of many different trades in this room and beyond, the 8-hour workday. Can I get a what for the 8-hour workday? Yeah! On the night of December 8th, 1865, this room was hung with banners reading things like, "Time for work and time for rest. Give us a chance to enjoy domestic bliss." Oh my gosh. The 3 8s, 8 for work, 8 for sleep, and 8 for instruction and recreation. The New York Times reported standing room only for a mass meeting held to institute the agitation of the 8 hours labor question. This language tells you that this was a relatively new idea, first proposed by a Welshman named Robert Owen in 1817. A workday, limited to 8 hours, was a big, big deal. It galvanized people. We can learn more about why this was such a hot issue throughout the 19th century just by eavesdropping on events right in this room. Or in this building. There were also labor events in other rooms. The Painters Union met here and talked about how they were offered 10 hours as a short workday. The Second Avenue Railroad workers passed literature around this room detailing how they were banned from visiting their homes during daylight hours and were thus almost strangers to the faces of their own children. Speakers at a meeting here of letter carriers talked about working 12 to 14 hours a day, and the Journeyman Barbers Protective Union held a meeting here on the subject, "Shall 96 hours constitute a work week?" 96, dude. In an age before microphones, these experiences were shouted, were yelled, were screamed right here in this room to packed audiences. The fact that this hall isn't full tonight, I think, speaks to a current lack of understanding about what unions can do based on a dearth of popular education about what they have done. And that's why we're here and why this event is being recorded and live streamed, tell your friends, to amplify the voices of people actively engaged in labor struggles now, today, and reflect on the labor struggles then in the past, which were all bound together by taking place in this singular space. Wait, I'm not done. I'm almost done, I promise. It's not just the space that unites us. Our challenges today are different, but I believe that the spirit is the same. One resolution passed in this room in 1874 was that human labor should not be regulated by the law of supply and demand, but from the standpoint of humanity. In an age of AI, this really resonates. That's enough of me geeking out about the 19th century. Find me after if you want to do more. But I would be remiss not to mention our voices from the Great Hall Digital Archive, which has ephemera from that time. We're grateful to the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation for helping to make our digital archive possible and for supporting programs like this one. Tonight's program is also part of the Philip F. Broik Lecture Series, which was established to support lectures on labor. And with that, I'd like to invite our wonderful, amazing, fantastic guests, moderator Claudia Irizarry Aponte, who covers labor for the nonprofit newsroom The City, Joshua B. Freeman, who is a labor historian and emeritus professor from Queens College and the Graduate Center, our fantastic panelists. I know you guys keep wanting to clap, but we're not there yet. Nkosa Barrett from the Women's Committee. She's the Women's Committee President of Civil Service, Plumbers Local 1. Plumbers Local 1. Harry Donas, the first Vice President of Civil Service Technical Guild Local 375, and an alumnus of the Cooper Union. Christopher Erikson, Business Manager of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 3. Thelma-Louise Fernandes, the Executive Board Member of the Sheetmetal Worker Local 28. and Zishun Ning of the Chinese Staff and Workers Association. So now, let's really get that clapping going. Hey.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening. I'm Claudia Irizarry Aponte. I will be moderating tonight's event. It is my sincere honor and a pleasure to moderate tonight's event. We have a wonderful panel of guests here tonight. To my left, we have Nkosa Barrett, who has over a decade of experience as a dedicated member of Plumbers Local 1 of New York City. She co-founded and now leads the Plumber Local 1's Women's Committee, the first women's committee within the United Association of Plumbers, and she serves as the project coordinator at Chicago Women in the Trades National Center. Welcome, Nkosa. Over here, also to my left, we have Harry Donas, the first vice president of the Civil Service Technical Guild Local 375. He has worked for over 38 years at the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, and tonight is a bit of a homecoming because he is an alumnus of the Cooper Union, where he received both his BA and MA in chemical engineering. Welcome, Harry. To my right here, we have Christopher Erikson, the business manager of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 3 here in New York City. Thelma-Louise Fernandes is an elected executive board member of the Sheetmetal Workers Local 28, a seasoned construction professional and educator with 25 years of experience. She co-hosts the New York City Trades Women Meetup, supporting and connecting women in construction. She is also the acting director and lead instructor for the Careers in Construction program at Rebuilding Together New York City.
Which Nkosa just got hired for. Shout out to Nkosa. Thank you.
To my right, we have Zishun Ning. He is an organizer with the Chinese Staff Workers Association, an independent worker center founded by restaurant, garment, and construction workers of Chinatown more than 40 years ago. Recently, CSWA successfully helped recover billions of dollars of stolen wages for thousands of home care workers and fought to end 24-hour workdays for home attendants. And last but not least, we have Joshua Freeman, Professor Joshua Freeman, a distinguished professor of history, emeritus at Queens College and labor historian at the Graduate Center at CUNY and the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Affairs. Welcome, Professor Freeman. I will now turn it over to Professor Freeman, who has prepared a keynote for this evening. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Claudia. It's such an honor to be here in this hallowed hall on the eve of May 1st. May Day is one of two great worker holidays that originated in the United States. The other is Labor Day, of course, and it's more widely celebrated here. But worldwide, it's actually May 1st that's the primary workers' holiday. And these two holidays, May Day and Labor Day, had their origins in the same era of American history. The first Labor Day celebration took place in September 1882 here in New York City. The first May Day celebrations took place across the country 4 years later as part of the campaign that we heard about to reduce the work week to 8 hours. And this was an era, the 1880s, of tremendous worker activism that led to these holidays. Union membership increased enormously. This was when the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, was founded. There were very large strikes, and unions got involved in political activity. Karl Marx's daughter, Eleanor, toured the United States in 1886, and she was astounded by the degree of labor mobilization that she saw. She wrote back to her father's colleague, Frederick Engels, and based on her reports, he wrote that in 1886, the U.S. labor movement burst out with irresistible force, spreading with the rapidity of a prairie fire that shook American society to its very foundations. That's the moment that May Day began. It was also, part of a pattern of growth and also retreat that has characterized organized labor since its beginnings at basically the same time as the American Revolution. The first unions in the United States were small groups of skilled craftsmen organized by their occupation, printers, shoemakers, carpenters, and the like, and their members were almost all white men. But over time, the labor movement broadened out to include factory workers, female workers, African-American workers, and others. And at its height in the 19th century, about 1 out of every 10 workers belonged to a union. The 20th century then saw a further expansion of organized labor, particularly associated with the tremendous growth of the manufacturing industries. And they were unionized by switching from this craft union model to what's called industrial unionism, organizing everybody at a particular work site, no matter what their job was, what their race was, what their sex was, what their background was. A critical step in that direction actually took place in this very room that we're sitting in November of 1909, when young female dressmakers who worked in what was then the garment district, which was in the Lower East Side, went on strike. They declared in this very room that they were not going to take the conditions anymore, and they began what was called the Uprising of the 20,000. And this helped create the garment unions as a model of this new model of unionism, of industrial unionism, that would prove so important during the Great Depression and World War II. So that by the end of World War II, by the early 1950s, 1 out of every 3 workers in America belonged to a union. And with such massive membership, unions could set wage levels for whole industries, and they established new norms, the 40-hour week, that you got health insurance at a job, that you got a pension, that you got a vacation. These are norms, of course, that have kind of, denormalized, if you want to use that phrase, in recent years. Unions also had great political clout, and they not only helped candidates in elections, but they helped get through Congress such path-breaking measures as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Medicare and Medicaid, and the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So this was a kind of heyday of organized labor, but in the 1970s, things began to change. There was a tremendous business counteroffensive against labor, and it came at the same time when the economy was changing very rapidly. And as industries that were union strongholds, like the auto industry or steel, shrank, the labor movement failed to spread to the rapidly growing industries, particularly in service and retail, or to the rapidly growing parts of the country, most notably the South. And as a result, the percentage of workers that belonged to a union in the United States began falling, and it's been pretty much falling ever since. Now, nationally, in the private sector, only 6% of workers belong to a union. In the public sector, it's a different story, where unions have grown to the extent that today, half of all union members work for government. Okay. Now, New York has been something of an exception in the decline of organized labor. It's a place where unions still have considerable clout. 20% of workers in New York City belong to a union, and in industries like construction, which we have very well represented here, or building services, healthcare, unions have kept wage levels high and have kept benefits available and kept open paths of upward mobility. Unions still have a lot of political clout in New York, in elections, City Hall, and Albany. But even here, unions face great challenges. The unionization rate for New York workers has been dropping. It's dropped 5% since 2004. Less than 14% of New York workers in the private sector are now unionized. And just to put that differently, what that means is that there are literally millions of low-paid New York City workers who do not have the advantage of union protection. The Trump administration presents very serious new challenges to organized labor. It's already transformed or tried to eliminate agencies that support workers' rights and safety, like the National Labor Relations Board, the Occupational Health and Safety Administration. But there have also been signs in recent years of energy and renewal in the labor movement. There have been very large successful strikes of late by groups like teachers and film and television writers and actors and auto workers. There have been impressive organizing victories, recently Volkswagen in Tennessee, Starbucks, and others. Public support for unions is actually higher today than it's been in decades. It's telling that after many years, when May Day was not celebrated in New York, there are again various events to mark the occasion, including a rally and march tomorrow at 5 p.m. in Foley Square, sponsored by the Central Labor Council. So, look, we're in a moment of great flux and uncertainty for labor, as for everything else in our society. There are plenty of challenges, but there are also great opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Freeman. Thank you, Professor Freeman. I want to kick off our conversation with a kind of enormous question for you all. I wanted to ask each of you, what's at stake for your members or the workers that you represent and worker power in general right now? We can start with Thelma-Louise.
Oh, well. What's at stake for the workers that the Sheetmetal Workers Local 28, or the International Association of Sheetmetal Workers represents, is collective action. So with the policies that are being enacted governmentally, we have to stick together as workers, as a collective, to try to make changes better. Every morning we wake up, we're not sure what these new changes are going to be. Things that we never thought could be rolled back have been rolled back under this new administration. And I think that labor unions' number one job at this point is to remain vigilant for the organizational structure of the union and the members as well.
Thank you. Chris?
Claudia, can you repeat the question?
What's at stake for workers right now and your members specifically in this political moment?
In the political movement, everything. Certainly, everything is at risk. There's no question about it. We are in uncharted waters, and we're in the fight, and people need to wake up. My grandfather was an iconic trade union leader in New York City, Harry Van Arsdale Jr. We call him labor's champion. And I'll just share, he watched the growth of the labor movement from the 30s until his death in 1986. And he watched how labor grew, the middle class in America grew. And then he saw the shift in the 70s and the 80s, the union-free environment, Reagan firing the air traffic controllers. And that's a fight that we've been in for more than 45 years now. And we're getting our asses kicked. And I'd be the first one to say it. But what he said on his deathbed to me was that 100 years from now, and this was in 1986, the labor movement's going to be stronger than it is today. But before that happens, people are going to lose everything before they decide to fight and come back again. And I'm afraid we're on the cusp of that becoming a reality. And so I don't want to lose everything. We have so much at stake here. Every day is a fight, and Local 3 is a strong union, and we're in the fight. Keep the union strong.
Thank you.
So first of all, I want to say I feel very proud, to be here and also hearing a lot of the, the labor history. But at the same time, I'm also feel very sad because, it shows that the history is regressing. Because we talk about 8-hour workdays over a century ago. And today we have 24-hour workday. And right here in New York City, where many of our members, who are women of color, home health aides, right, home attendants, being forced to work 24-hour workdays. Imagine that, days on end, 24-hour workdays. And this is, can even exist, in New York City. So I would say, it's not just, the kind of challenge faced by our members, but a challenge I think face all of us, right, as working people, as New Yorkers, right, that this kind of inhumane working condition, can continue to exist, days on end. Not to mention that, 24-hour workdays only getting paid by 13, but many of these home care workers, their health are destroyed, their families are being destroyed. Imagine, you're working 24-hour workdays, taking care of the, people in very bad conditions, and that also hurt the patients too, right? And this is, I think, many of them, already they already themselves become the patient. And we have, the city government really, continue to maintain these kind of, work days. They just, say they are progressive. They use their identity, to say, hey, look, we're so progressive. We have so-and-so, people of color become the council member. So-and-so, woman, of color, become the city council speaker. But yet, we are not really, progressing, in this term. So I think we see that, this kind of condition exists. It shows how bad we are at, as a society, as a city. So how are we going to break that, right? And I think, by connecting, by making the unity across industries, because I think that concerns not only just the home care workers, the long hours, the kind of, that destroy our health. That really, I think, something that we should really pay attention. And I think that's the only way, if we come together to fight against these 24-hour workdays and to tell the whole world that, we are not cheap. We're not just like, oh, you give me money, I can do 24. But we really care about our health and our time and our family.
Thank you, Zishun. Thank you, Zishun, and we will talk more about the 24-hour home care rule in just a few minutes. Nkosa.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I think Eric said it best. Everything is at stake because the protections that the unions offer, the benefits that the unions offer, we're living in a time where it's like, he can't do this, they can't do this, this is not legal, and we're witnessing it firsthand being done. So when you start taking away the union protections and the union benefits, you are literally, it's people's livelihoods and their well-beings that are being damaged. So again, everything is at stake.
Thank you. Harry?
No comment. Only kidding. Okay. One of the exciting things of being in the union recently is a lot of the younger members are really getting excited to be part of the union. And we have an active Next Wave committee, and they're really trying to get even more people. A lot of our members, meaning younger members, went to the mayoral forum in February. I think there's a problem with maybe perception, which is that like consumer confidence, they say part of the economy is based on, 2/3 of it might be consumer spending, and that's based on consumer confidence. So people want to be part of a winner, and I think by just beating the unions down, then maybe we could be vulnerable to an implosion. Peeling off layer after layer of unions to the point where no one's really part of a union. It's a scary thing that that's happening. My local, at this point, I don't see as too affected. I think my baby brother's in the audience. He's born 3 days after me. That's called my baby brother. He works for DDC. He may know more, but I can't see anybody out there, not even my mom. Anyway, so, we're worried about privatization in Local 375. That's not really maybe an issue here. I know that I attended a union meeting at NYCHA today, and they were saying they're totally federally funded, so that could, that money could be a risk as well. And it seems like an attack on NYCHA is an attack on the not the poor, but maybe the less advantageous than us. So I just think they're trying to weaken us little by little. Thanks.
Thank you. Professor Freeman?
Well, I have to agree with all my colleagues who have more direct contact with their members, but I guess one thing I would say is that, because New York has got one of the highest unionization rates in the country, I think we've been a little slow to realize how precarious the situation of organized labor is, and maybe unprepared, really, for the kind of counteroffensive that we're seeing now. And I think we've got a little time, but not a lot. So I think, labor really has to get together. And I agree that I think the solution has to come from unity beyond the organizational, boundaries, because the entire working class, the entire labor movement's being challenged, and I think new kinds of solidarity have to be developed.
Thank you. Zishun, you were just talking about the 24-hour home care rule here in New York City, which for people who are unfamiliar with this, home care workers in New York and New York State, just by the way the law is structured, are compensated only for 13 hours, even when they work a full 24-hour shift. So this is a struggle that was really thrust into the public view in New York in the last decade. It's been a struggle now 10 years, and it's still ongoing. I'm wondering, what lessons have you learned in all these years, and how do you help workers keep the faith?
I think first of all, right, the 24-hour workday only get paid 13. It's not legal because if the workers cannot sleep continuously for 5 hours, the agency have to compensate all the hours of the 24-hour, and also have to split the shift. But the fact that the 24-hour workday can continue to exist already is showing something very decadent, I think, in our city and in our state. But I think a lot of the workers, right, over the years, have been rising up, right? First, I think start with this the home care agency, Chinese American Planning Council. By the way, they are actually, try to have this progressive image, in New York State, thinking that they represent the Chinese community, and that's actually very bad because they say the Chinese women, they like to work 24-hour workdays. They say, they should be thankful, for even having a job, as a 24-hour worker, But I think the workers from that agency rising up actually inspire, workers from other agencies to also rising up, union and non-union. So they all come together and actually they see, their collective power, and actually that affect the whole society, who also come out and condemn, this violence, right? It's really the violence, right? 24-hour workday, without a proper sleep. Basically, it's like torture, right? And I think over the years, really, we are able to, break through the kind of, racism, from our own community, right? The Chinese American Planning Council, actually able to break through that. And nowadays, I don't think that in the society, people would say 24-hour workday is good. I don't think anyone is able to do that. And even looking at this mayoral election, actually majority of the candidates already saying that they support ending the 24-hour workdays. We have a bill at the city council that's getting a lot, more and more support. Of course, the agencies and the government know that this practice is wrong. So what they do, they just try to keep dragging out. But actually, the more they drag out, the more people, realize how bad it is. And more people know that this got to stop, and the New York City is just so shameful to continue to have this practice. So I think if anything, we have more faith. And because our movement, is growing stronger and bigger, and more people see the hypocrisy, of the current city administration, with the Speaker Adrian Adams, who have been maintaining the 24-hour workdays. So the more it drags out, actually the worse, for her, especially now she's running for mayor. It's such a joke, So I think people really should hold her accountable, for continuing to maintain this violence.
Thanks, Zishun. And you actually have a pretty cool event happening tomorrow. You want to tell us about it? Plug your event?
Well, yeah, so we have a May Day protest in front of City Hall tomorrow at 12 p.m. So we have already more than 50 organizations sign on, so we are proposing, to have a new People First movement that really center around our health, our family, and our community. So this includes abolishing the 24-hour workdays, fight for the universal health care, and also stop the displacement. So this is going beyond, just like, begging, for crumbs or, more than just having, little wage increase. But we say that what's more important, for us, right? No money can buy back, our time, right? And our time with our family and our health. So this is what we prioritize, right? Our health and our community. And we also fight back against the high rents, that really taking away, our hard-earned money. And also, the lack of health care really, destroying us. So, we urge everyone, to join us tomorrow, 12 p.m. in front of City Hall and demand the City Council, do the right thing and demand that Adrian Adams, right or wrong.
Thanks, Zishun. On the subject of immigrant female workers, my next question is for Nkosa and Thelma-Louise. Here in New York City, we're seeing this trend or this pattern of more women, especially recently arrived migrant women, joining the building trades. There's enormous demand for OSHA training for immigrant women. And I wanted to ask, why do you think that is? And how the labor movement can support these new workers, both union and non-union? Nkosa.
Thank you. I think that if you don't see yourself in a if you don't see yourself in a position, if you don't see it, you don't think you can be it. And I think that these women are realizing that it's a tangible goal to have a viable career, that they can take care of their families and work a 9-to-5, medical benefits, good paying jobs. And I think that my message is the same. I do a lot of trade speaking, and my message is always that if I can do it, you can do it. My daughter, she says to me a lot, like, Mommy, I want to be a plumber just like you. Whatever you want to be, baby, that's fine. And I think she's saying that because she sees me in this position. So she knows that it's tangible. Her godmother is an electrician, a local 3 electrician. I'm a plumber. She has these people that she sees and she loves and she looks up to. And I think it's the same thing with these workers. These women see that they can do it. And it's a tangible goal that they can grasp and grab it by the horns and run with it.
Thank you. Thelma-Louise.
So I do agree with Nkosa that representation matters, but I think for the question of the union building trades in the United States of America, it's a little bit more nuanced because you cannot become a union building trades member unless you are a United States citizen, right? So I think the path for undocumented workers will definitely be a bit more difficult, but anyone with a valid work authorization can join the union, and if they want to, I think they should, right? Genders don't have jobs, so whoever wants to totally should. There's a ton of money in construction. Every empty lot that you all remember passing by when you were younger or maybe a year ago is now an active construction site, right? If that's not the writing on the wall, I don't know what is.
Thank you. And Nkosa, Chicago Women in the Trades had an early victory earlier this year by winning the injunction against the Trump administration's executive order against equal opportunities for federal contractors. What can unions and other groups do to protect women and other vulnerable workers in this moment? And also, what does a post-EEO world look like? How are you preparing for that?
I'll start with the last question. It's scary. It looks scary. And how to prepare for that, again, the message doesn't change. You keep pushing forward and you keep fighting the good fight. And I think that Chicago Women in the Trades taking on, it wasn't just the Trump administration, it was the Justice Department, it was the DOL. I think they set the precedence for these executive orders. They're wrong, they're illegal, and we're gonna fight for what we believe in. That's it.
Thank you. My next question is for the group. It kind of goes off of one point that Professor Freeman made in his earlier response about, New York is a blue city in a blue state. A question for you, Professor Freeman. Just how should the labor movement be preparing in this moment? Are they insulated from these forces? And for the union leaders in this group, do you feel insulated from those forces, and how are you organizing against them? But I'll start with Professor Freeman.
Well, I think there are two aspects to it, or two that strike me first. One is mobilizing existing members, and educating them and getting them involved and making them understand how much they personally have at stake. But I think there's also the issue of addressing the decline, even here in New York, of union membership. And, unions in New York still have a lot of resources, financial and personnel. And one of the things that strikes me is that there have not, back in Harry Van Arsdale's days, there were efforts by the whole union movement to organize new groups of workers. For example, when the taxi workers were organized, they were organized by the Central Labor Council, not an individual union. And I think that maybe that model we have to go back to. In other words, everyone's vulnerable when you're down to 16% instead of 35% being in unions. So I think one of the things that I think labor needs to explore is, are there different models towards organizing, to getting all the new workers in New York, into the union structures that draw on the existing resources that we have.
Thank you. Harry.
Okay, I have a comment this time. I think with organizing, there's two parts to it. One is to get members to join the union, pay their dues, because unions can't function otherwise. And the other is for the members to be active. And as I mentioned before, a lot of the younger members are idealistic, they're active, and that is great. I think that maybe we have this view that even in a red world, again, being in a blue city, and even with Adams kind of sucking up to the president, I think we feel that things will be okay. I mean, we, my view is that we have my union has 5,000 people, 5,000 members that are dues paying almost, and I feel they're all my bosses. So again, in terms of organizing, just trying to engage the members and kind of realize that the union is there for them, to protect their job, to fight for some sort of wage increase, not usually a great one, but in terms of organizing, I think the best things I've ever heard is I like Local 375. I don't want to go into another local and stuff like that. So to me, again, it's just working on, again, to me, organizing is we have a fixed number of members or represented members, so we can't go much further than that. But again, it's, although there's a ton of privatization, which, those are potential union jobs that, we'll never get. There's a huge amount of outsourcing in the city at TDC, at DEP, at DOT, not that labor could do all that work, but they could do a lot of that project management work. So again, to summarize, it's just trying to make the members really like the union, and then maybe word of mouth to kind of get more people in. Thanks.
Thanks. Nkosa?
I think it's a loaded question, but I think organizing is the key. And I personally, my local, Plumbers Local Union #1, I have faith that they're doing everything in their power to protect our rights. And we just have to keep organizing.
Yeah. And a question for both you and Harry. I'm curious about how those conversations look like within your own organizations. How are you having those conversations with your members? Are you hosting meetings? What does that look like?
My leadership is having those conversations. Mm-hmm. And that's why I can have the faith that they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, fighting for their membership. The membership is that's their job. Their job is to protect the membership. So I do believe that they're doing the right thing in regard to the membership.
In terms of Local 375, we don't have great resources. as I mentioned earlier in the green room, more than half our dues goes to our parent unions. Actually, 70% does not go to Local 375. So in a way, we're kind of hunter-gatherers in that we can't really do a lot. I mean, people have such busy lives that sometimes they don't really want to spend the extra time on doing other things. But again, to me, we are cultivating relationships with politicians, which is terrific, you know, trying to influence them to improve Tier 6 to some other benefits. And again, another shout out to the younger members, because again, they went to the mayoral forum. I didn't go there, so I'm almost embarrassed talking about like activism when I think the younger crowd is ready to take over. I'm a little bit older and beaten down. Thanks.
Thanks. Zishun.
So I think this past presidential election, right, actually New York State saw the most increase in support for Trump. And I don't think that's, you know, just coming out of nowhere. And I think that reflects that our leadership in New York State and New York City, people really are fed up with what they are doing. Because most of the votes, I think people go for Trump is because they're dissatisfaction, right? And I think in our progressive circle, in the labor movement, I think people are just too, you know, really just following whatever the current leadership is doing. You know, they call it a progress when you say, oh, instead of a white person, you know, in leadership, now you have people of color in leadership. But these are the people who climb up the ladder, have a seat at the table, and continue what, you know, it's been doing. And it's actually even worse because you can see that 24-hour workdays can exist, you know, not somewhere, you know, in the red state. It's in the blue state. Outside of New York State, you can ask around. Outside New York State, you don't find that, you know, 24-hour workdays. And it's the state-sanctioned 24-hour workdays, even worse. And in New York City, we have seen, you know, the rents skyrocketed. And it's under the blue state. Because we have the leadership in the city hall that tell people, you need to get the developer, make as much money as they can, so that they can give you some crumbs. And it's also the kind of current leadership that privatize the healthcare. You know, starting with the city retirees. So, you know, that's the kind of leadership, you know. So if the leaders, you know, in the labor movement, the leaders in the progressive circle to say that, oh, this is still progress because now at least we have people of color, you know, doing it, you know, forcing you to accept this condition. They call it this progress. Come on. This is history regressing, you know. So I think for organizing, you know, I think we got to ask ourselves, you know, for what, right? Are we continuing to organize to, you know, tell behind this kind of, you know, pro-developer agenda, pro-sweatshop agenda? Or we really need to build something new, you know, independent, you know, from these two parties to say what we actually want, you know, as a working class, right? So that's why, you know, I mentioned, you know, about this May Day, because that's the first step. We're trying to build that. You know, connecting people from all 5 boroughs, you know, and across trades, you know, to see what we have in common and what we fight against, you know, to take down this hypocrisy, you know, of this, you know, so-called progressive, you know, city council and the mayor, and assert, you know, what we want, you know, as a class, as a common interest. And I think that's the only way that we're able to really, you know, break through, you know, from, you know, the current political climate, you know, whether you have the so-called progressive, you know, on one hand, and then you have the Trump on the other hand, and then people just, you know, forced to choose which one is the less evil. But let's assert, you know, positively what we want and use that to demand, put a demand on these new leaders, you know, to say which side are you on. And if you don't support us, then you'll never be able to, you know, represent us. And that's, I think, is the only way to fight against, you know, the current Trump 2.0. Instead of just like, you know, allowing them to implement the Trump agenda, you know, in New York City and in the guise, you know, using their facade, you know, the people of color face to, you know, assert the Trump agenda.
Thank you, Zishun.
I don't know that the Trump administration's has any people of color at any table talking about anything, new or old. But regarding organizing and in the construction industry in New York City, there's always been non-union contractors, small. 2008, the economic crisis blew it up, and developers that built this city union, always built union, were under pressure, primarily from the banks that were not willing to give financing to these developers unless they lowered their labor costs. And what that meant was they had to go non-union and take the non-union bid. And that was the beginning of the open shop movement in New York City that has been going on now for some time. They've been successful. Every job they do, they get better at, almost to the point where they've saturated any amount of skilled non-union workers and can't finish jobs now. And they're asking our union contractors to come in and help them out. Organizing is difficult. Organizing is person to person, in your face. And your union, if you have unemployment, they don't want you to organize more electricians while they're sitting on the bench anyway. So you need to organize the work. You need to get a collective, you need to convince the employees to be recognized by a union, represented by a union, and negotiate a collective bargaining agreement with their employer and bring that employer under the collective bargaining. And so what do we do in New York real fast? 55 non-union jobs. I sent two Local 3 members, and they started handing out flyers. And when you're standing outside a non-union job, those people are afraid that they even look at somebody handing a flyer out, they're going to get fired. And for all intents, that shitty job that they have is what puts food on their table. And that's the biggest impediment to organizing. They're not willing to risk getting fired by signing a pledge card. And so we handed out flyers, and the flyer didn't say join Local 3. The flyer said that the building trades have acknowledged that suicide is the biggest, is prevalent within the building trades. And you are part of the building trades. It's the first time that anybody recognized that non-union workforce, that they're part of the building trades. And that was the first flyer. And we gave them all of the resources. And they came back the next week, and a couple of them said thank you to our guys. Then the next flyer talked about, do you know your rights, regardless of your immigration status. And then we started to educate them to the point of, why shouldn't you make the money that the union building trades make? Why shouldn't you be able to afford a home, send your children to college, have medical care, and be able to retire in dignity? Why shouldn't you? You can do that. You got to take that first step. So educating this workforce in New York City that has been exploited by developers and non-union contractors is an objective of our union, with little support from the building trades, individual unions. A lot of them are okay. They got every job. Elevator constructors are locked in. Operating engineers, pretty good. But the mechanical trades are the ones where most of the pressure comes from. And not only externally, we're organizing, teaching critical thinking skills to our own members. We've been teaching critical thinking for 50 years to our members for them to understand the problems that we're faced and what is the most effective course of action to get beyond that. And so COMET, construction organizing, teaching our members to understand why they need to organize and bring in new members and bring in the work. And so we're working it from inside and outside. Like I said, 55 non-union jobs for 8 weeks with flyers. And you get a little support, but again, they're afraid. They're afraid they're going to get fired and lose that job, despite having the rights to organize, which are under attack right now anyway.
Thank you.
So I'm not going to say the same thing 5 times, right? It's already been beat to death, but I do agree organizing is very important. And like Chris said, organizing also comes from within the organization. I think reinvigorating members about unionism and the rights that we had to fight for, or not we, the first wave, right? Because essentially this is the third wave, but reminding people what the first wave had to fight for and reigniting that fight into them is very important from within the organization. But I also think that knowledge is very important too on the outside of the organization, because a lot of people just think of unions and they think of this behemoth, right? The majority of the workers do not work for labor unions. They work for corporate companies that pay them a viable wage, whatever the market dictates that that wage is at the time, and there's a lot of fear. I left a corporate job to join Local 28 because I saw the writing on the wall and it was just not sustainable for me, right? So I think for me, letting people know that the key things that unions bring is providing a collective voice and power for their members, right? That's organizing, protecting rights and due process, facilitating organized resistance and dissent, and supporting workers' well-being. Once people know that, it's a lot easier to organize, because those are the things that we want collectively in our communities, and we have that in our organizations. Is it perfect? No, I'll be the first person to tell you it's not perfect, but it is a start.
Thank you. My next question is for Harry. You were talking about kind of the challenges in having your own membership engage in this moment, and I wanted to talk about the Trump administration's attacks on public sector workers at the federal level and how that may trickle down to the state and local level. They've made their position on public sector unions very clear, and the right had its first major anti-public sector union success with the Janus decision in the Supreme Court. And I wanted to ask, I'm wondering what steps you took to protect your membership from that first attack, what you wish you'd done differently, or just what you learned from that transition, and how you're preparing your organization for the fight ahead.
Okay, I think a lot of this, I'm going to repeat myself. I think, again, that we feel as city workers, we're a little bit insulated from the craziness of the federal government. Although, as I mentioned, we do have agencies which depend on federal funding, so that's an issue right now. I haven't seen a whole lot of activity by Local 375 in terms of preparing for the worst. I know DC 37 is working on things such as helping out members with immigration issues and such, but I don't think there's, at this point, I guess what we've said before is that we don't feel it. We don't really see it coming until it comes, and then maybe at that point it's too late. But again, with Local 375, we have, like, as a public sector union, it's, to me, there's a fixed number of people we can grab onto. I mean, the best thing we could do is to attack privatization, which would increase the number of our members, bring more people. Again, as I mentioned, the outsourcing is just astronomical. If you look at Local Law 63 and you see the number of city contracts and the number of project managers and technical work that is done by the outside, and again, DC 37 has put out white papers that show that keeping things in-house saves a ton of money and such. So I think, again, that if the funding shrinks, it's going to hurt us. And there's been such a trend towards privatization. I know that's one of the ad hoc committees that people complain we haven't been active about. So we have a lot of homework to do, and I can't answer any better than that. Thanks.
Thanks. Thelma-Louise, your parent union, SMART, has been instrumental in the fight to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia home. Can you share any updates about his case?
So the last that I heard, there was an update right before this meeting started. I was not able to watch it, but the Supreme Court ruled that Kilmar should be brought home, and the Trump administration is dragging their feet. But that is all I have on Kilmar right now.
Mm-hmm. And I'm also wondering, what more can the labor movement do to protect immigrants, both union and non-union, especially because, and I'm wondering your thoughts on whether someone's legal status in this country should be a barrier to having a good union representation in the building trades? And how do you organize for that future?
So we don't have any illegal immigrants in the building trades because we require our members to be United States citizens or working on a work authorization, which is why SMART championed the fight for Kilmar, because Kilmar was a first-term sheet metal apprentice out of Local 100 in the DMV area, and he had proper work authorization. So because Kilmar was working properly, supposed to be here, I believe he was granted status in 2019, his removal and deportation was illegal, and the labor movement was able to jump behind him. But if he was not granted that status, then he would have no leg to stand on, and the labor movement would not be able to do anything about it. So it is very important that people have their status together. I mean, I don't begrudge anyone looking for a better life. My stance on immigration is not the government's stance on immigration, and quite frankly, nobody cares about my stance on immigration. I'm the child of immigrants. So, you know, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. But I think that that is a big distinction on why Kilmar's case is a hot button topic, because Kilmar is supposed to be here legally and his union is fighting for him.
Yeah. I do want to ask that question following up to the larger group about how to best protect immigrants, non-union workers in this moment. Is there a role for the labor movement to play here, protecting folks who may not have legal status in this country and may not have representation?
I'm going to second what Thelma said. You have to make sure that your ducks are in a row and that your papers are in order, because if they're not, it is nothing that the labor union, that organized labor can do for you. They're able to fight for him because everything was in order and everything was correct and he was legally in the United States. If you don't have that, we do not have a leg to stand on, and we can't fight for you. So again, you know, like she said, my stance on immigration doesn't matter. I am a child of an immigrant as well. But in order for it to work, it has to be legal. You have to go about it the legal way so that you can. But at this point, legal Americans are being deported. So that is something that we need to look at as well, because how do you navigate that?
Yeah. Zishun, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on this issue.
So actually in the United States, currently we have a modern day slave law. It's called the employer sanctions. And that law actually criminalizes undocumented immigrants for working. So basically, like, you know, others have said earlier, right, you have to have the work authorization. Otherwise, you know, you cannot join a union. So that's what the criminalization comes in, right? Because supposedly, you know, undocumented immigrant cannot work. And that name comes from, you know, actually that law was passed in the 1980s. And at the time, actually, you know, both parties, and even including the union, support, because they say that's going to protect the American workers. But look, after that law passed, actually the condition went down drastically. And the unionization rates also went down. Because that law actually gives the employer the tool to check your status. You know, and so the employer can use that to say, hey, you know, I know that, you know, you're here illegally. So you have to, you know, work harder. You know, less pay, more hours. And people wonder, you know, what does it have to do with me? You know, I'm legal. Actually, it hurts, you know, those who have documents the most, and hurt the citizen the most. Because if we allow one section of the working class to have no rights, you know, to organize, then it drags down the condition for all of us. And then even pit workers against each other. That's, I think, the sentiment right now, you know, among the working class. They, you know, being pitted against each other instead of, you know, seeing who's our common enemy. So I think that law, you know, really need to be, you know, repealed. And I think the AFL-CIO already, you know, in the early 2000s, changed their position to say, hey, that law is no good. But I think we need more efforts, I think in the national level to repeal the employer sanctions and guarantee equal rights for all workers. And I think that's in the interest, of every one of us, whether you're documented or undocumented, because, we have the same interests, and we, should be equal, regardless, your status. You should be able to join a union and organize, together.
Chris, did you want to say something?
I do. Again, I'm a trade unionist, and yet a conservative building trades union, Local 3, yet very progressive. But that issue of documented and undocumented is what split the labor movement. And many Trump supporters, union members, building trades especially, were all about undocumented workers got to go. There's no question. They were absolutely not accepting that undocumented workers should be here working in the United States, taking what would be American workers' construction jobs, and they're divided on it. From within the AFL-CIO, there's a split on that. I think about the poultry workers. I think about the farm workers. I think about the construction workers in New York City. When the guy falls off the side of the building and died, and his co-workers ran. They didn't run to him, they ran away because he was an undocumented worker, and they didn't want to, put themselves in jeopardy. Not holding employers responsible for holding them accountable for hiring undocumented workers is a shortcoming. I'm not positive, but I think down in Florida, where they built non-union, I think with many undocumented workers, as soon as ICE and Trump is on the scene, they decimated the construction industry down there. They're gone. They just said, I'm not putting themselves at risk. And so what do you got? You got them talking about reinstituting child labor in Florida. The illegal immigrants are gone, and now they want to put kids to work. It's okay to work kids at night and shifts and all of that. Horrible stuff. So it is a little divisive within the labor movement as well, within unions themselves, on the issue of those that are here in this country legally, and in our industry as well. You need an I-9 in order to be referred out for a job. And so we don't have that risk within the building trades. So, but it still exists. And it's one that America has to come to grips with as to what they're going to do here. And we're divided.
Thank you. Harry?
Just some quick comments. If people don't understand, my local or the greater thing, DC 37 is like an umbrella organization of about 55 locals, which are to be mostly independent. So DC 37, again, I don't see it affecting my local, except in the way I'm going to mention in a second, but DC 37 is preparing resources for people with immigrant issues. So again, I haven't delved into what they're doing, but I know that they've done that. One of my concerns, though, is my union is a huge number of immigrant members. And one of my concerns is, again, I don't know what paperwork you need, but if you, one member was talking about going home to Nigeria to take care of a family member, and I go, where were you born? And he goes, Nigeria, and I'm just wondering, how easy it is for him to get back. So that's kind of a concern I would have with some of my members. You shouldn't have to feel that once you leave the country, you can't get back in. And one of the things that Chris has mentioned, I think one of the toughest things with unions is that we do have disparate interests, and from a union to union and such. Like in the public sector unions that we have, I know I'm going off topic here a little bit, we have pretty good medical benefits. So when other people who are on the liberal side want to push for universal health care, we're not for that, because we've sacrificed income, salary for that benefit. So it's so hard to get people to agree on, things, but I would think that Trump is such an obvious villain that we should all be able to gather around,
Thank you. We're running a little short on time, and I want to keep going on our next topic, which is the election here in New York City. Very important election. My next question is for Professor Freeman. We have a ton at stake in the upcoming mayoral primary here in New York City, and we've seen a lot of the kingmaker unions support different candidates, whether it's because of the ranked choice voting or for other means. And I wanted to just ask you just why you think that is, and to talk to us a little bit more about what exactly is at stake for workers this year.
Well, I think that's interesting because as I tried to say in my opening remarks, labor has a lot of clout in New York City politically, but it often counteracts that power by supporting rival candidates and rival positions. Some of it, I think, is sort of structural. You know, it's very hard to unite the unions when we have some very big players. You know, there are unions like Chris's union, or DC 37, or the UFT, or 32BJ, or 1199. Some of those unions, like 1199, like the 1199 has more members than the National Auto Workers Union have, you know? So in a way, they're independent agents. They have their own political operations, their own policy staffs. And the Central Labor Council, which might once have been a kind of umbrella coordinating council, you know, they don't need it, frankly, you know, and they don't really pay a lot of attention to it. But, you know, for each individual union, it becomes transactional. They're cutting their deals with this candidate or that candidate. There's a very short-term logic to that, but I think the long-term effect is to diminish the power of labor, you know, because you have no commonality. And I think if there was, you know, even if you endorse the same candidate, let's say you just came up with a program where, when, you know, all unions in New York, to endorse a candidate, you have to agree to these 5 things, you know. It would be so much stronger. So I think this is very short-sighted in my view. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it makes me really sad to watch this play out in the current mayoral election.
What exactly is short-sighted? That the unions are so split among all the different candidates in this field, or that they're supporting particular candidates? And do you mean Cuomo specifically or others?
Well, it's so transactional. I mean, look, unions represent particular members, and that's their responsibility. I'm not trying to diminish that. You know, it's their job to say, I need to advance the interests of my particular members. But some of those interests as particular members are, you know, go beyond your own organization. They have to do with life in the whole city and the nation. And if you can't find a way to, you know, get beyond that transactional kind of politic, you know, which we've seen a lot on the state and the city level in New York, you know, to build a broader movement that says, here are some basic principles. This is where every politician, I mean, I think this was put forth very eloquently just now. I think that would, in the long run, be a much better approach. But, you know, a lot of unions aren't thinking in the long run. They're thinking, we're going to have a new mayor, I got this thing, I want to get it through, I'm going to talk to the guy ahead of time. If he agrees to do it, we'll give him a, you know. And I think we're seeing a lot of that happening right now.
Thanks. And Chris, I know we had an earlier conversation where you made a similar point to Professor Freeman about the fracturing of power and the labor movement here in New York politically, how like the axis of power has changed because in this election, just like in the previous election, the unions haven't all lined up behind one particular candidate, or they've all made their own decisions kind of like ad hoc. Can you just tell us a little bit more about why you think that is, that there has been that transformation?
There was a time in New York City that no union would get out in front of the New York City Central Labor Council, who had a process where the political directors would, you know, come together and make recommendations, and then the CLC would make an endorsement of one candidate. Now, there were unions that weren't going to support that candidate, but they never publicly got out in front of the Central Labor Council. And then that started to change. And again, it changed when a union, I don't like to say cut a deal, but had a relationship with somebody that they believed was going to favor them, that their members, and do things for them politically that they may not be able to get out of another candidate, and then they started to pick them off one at a time. And If my union supports one candidate, somebody else supports another, are we canceling each other out? Is labor's ability to elect a pro-union candidate, even though you can't agree on which one it should be, is diminished somewhat when everybody is looking out for themselves. And that has become more prevalent today than it's ever been in the labor movement. I have this thinking that the MAGA right extreme, the Democratic Socialist left extreme, I don't know that either one of them can do it or get it done. And I think it's the moderates. I think it's the moderates in the Democratic Party, it's the moderates in the Republican Party that need to come together and figure out how to elect people that are going to work together and not for a narrow-minded extremist agenda on either side, and work to fix the problems in America for all of the American people. That's what has to happen. The middle's got to come together from both parties, and I hope it can happen in my lifetime.
Thank you. Zishun, I wanted to ask, you had made this point earlier just about the trend that we're seeing in New York about Asian voters moving towards the right, in particular Chinese communities in New York, and what you had described as workers' frustration with Democratic leadership right now, this being a reaction to that. I'm wondering if you can just tell a little bit more about what those conversations are like with your own members. How do you reckon with this frustration while also trying to educate them on just the realities of this being an administration that is a threat to immigrants and workers? What are those conversations like?
I think they see very clearly, right? Those who implement these pro-developer, pro-sweatshop agendas are themselves the Democrats, in the establishment. So I think of course, we are, a nonprofit organization. We don't, side with, whatever party. So, I do have members, we do have members, who are in Republicans. We do have members who are in, Democrats. But I think the conversation have been working in the sense that, the simple question, what do we want, right? Instead of, which party, you go for. And if we have the movement that build around the people first demands, then we can, see, which candidate really supporting it. So I think the question simply is that, do you have the politician you want to follow, or do you want to build a movement and let the politician follow you? And, that would dictate, whether you can win or not. And I think in the New York City, we have pretty good examples, in the more local elections. Just look at last year in Flushing. Like I said earlier, right, we have seen a lot of, rising, in support for Trump, I think especially in Queens, in the last presidential election. But if you look at the more local election, you can see something very different. And in Flushing, for example, the local assembly member, the state assembly member, Ron Kim, himself is a Democrat, right? But because he took a very strong stand against the 24-hour workdays, and he's actually the first elected officials in the whole New York to speak out against it and not afraid of challenging the Democratic establishment, Governor Cuomo and Governor Hochul, for maintaining the 24-hour workdays, and call out the Chinese American Planning Council, which has, such a close ties, with this establishment, and these other, politicians, have no guts, to challenge it. But Ron Kim really stood up because he saw the power of the working people and really, stood very firm, firmly against it. So he got people's support, and he actually won in Flushing, where, in the presidential level, actually that area went to Trump, but in the local level, it went to Ron Kim. So I think that's the very good example, right? You run on the platform, you run on the issue that working people care about, then they will see very clearly, who to vote for. And I think in the other example is here, in the, right here in the Lower Manhattan, a little bit south of here in the District 1, we have the city council member, Christopher Marte, who also very stood, firmly with the working people, right? Against the displacement, against the 24-hour workdays, and fight for the universal health care. And he got people's support. And he's not this typical, progressive Democrat where you just say the nice things, but, betray the working people, every step of the way. He's for real, because there's a movement that's backing him. And now, in the election time again, of course, he's facing a lot of challenges, right? From the developers, from the sweatshop bosses. They're gonna, send out a lot of these campaign ads, against him. But if he has the people's support, then he's not afraid. He's continuing carrying this platform forward despite all this challenging from the establishment. So I think that's the way, what we can, do to build up a movement to really changing the narrative.
Thank you. All right, we're down to our final 2 questions for the group. It's to your point, Zishun, it's really been unions who have been leading the charge against Doge, Musk, Trump in this moment, filing these lawsuits that have gone all the way up the ladder. And a lot of people have been frustrated by what they view as like the political leadership and the Democratic establishment's kind of like inertia in this moment. Nkosa, I'm going to start with you. What do you think Democratic leadership at the local, state, federal level should be doing differently, and are they doing enough to protect workers?
I think that they need to come together, and they need to be on one page. They need to agree on what it is they want, and then they need to agree on how they're going to go about getting it. I think that if it's a Republican and a Democrat thing, I think that something that Republicans do very well is stand behind each other. And no matter if it's wrong or it's right, they stick together. And I think that's what the Democrats need to do.
Thank you. Professor Freeman, I'm going to go in a more random order this time.
Well, let me say what I think they shouldn't do. They shouldn't be restorationists. They shouldn't say, oh, we just have to go back to, January 19th. Because America wasn't working on January 19th, especially for working people. Life was not that great. So I think you have to project, and other people have been just saying this just now, you have to project a vision of the kind of America that you want, that addresses the kind of issues that, Trump and others have been able to exploit. The kind of neoliberal society we had just didn't work for a lot of people, and the kind of resentments against this were very free-floating and take bizarre forms sometimes. But I think that unless, you can't just say, oh, we're the good guys. You really have to confront some of the difficult realities of American life and talk about them frankly. The maldistribution of power as well as wealth, the seeming inability to do very basic things that other countries seem to be able to do. These are real issues, and so I think it's a big challenge, and there are issues like that on a local and state level as well as on the national level. Let's just not pretend like, oh, we were really doing a good job and some weird thing happened, because that's not the history.
Thank you. I'm going to jump over to this table, Thelma-Louise.
Okay, so I think that to really answer this, right, we have to be honest. I think government leadership at the local level does not want the same thing that its citizens want, and this is clearly reflected every election season when they come out, shake hands, kiss babies, and it's quid pro quo. I think we really need to have grassroots politicians rising up from the communities and running for these offices, and I think that we should become the change we want to see, whatever that looks like.
Thank you. Chris.
I'm going to be unapologetic here, and I'm going to say something that people are not going to agree with, people that are not in our circumstances. But as far as the IBEW is concerned, Joe Biden was the most pro-union president that we have ever had in this country, ever. And for those that didn't share in the opportunities that came with what he did for union jobs and especially IBEW workers, I'm sorry, Again, within our own families, they're divided. You've got brothers hating sisters. You got uncles and aunts not talking to one another. It's the extreme politics that have, how many family dinners were ripped apart because families aren't talking to each other over the politics. And the one thing that I'm not going to let happen in my union is I'm not going to let the politics where I have MAGA supporters in Local 3 and we have others that think differently. I'm not going to let those differences weaken and destroy the union, because there's nothing more important than the organization, despite political differences within a family or in a union, and we're not going to let that happen. And so I'm unapologetic. And when it comes to what Joe Biden was able to do for the green economy, the grid, the electrical, EV station, offshore wind, data storage, electrical work, and I'm just not gonna apologize. Infrastructure, all of it. People got distracted. Too many people were sleeping. They needed to, can you curse here?
I'm all for
They
it.
needed to wake the fuck up. I gave 5,000 of these TFU stickers out across the union, and unfortunately not enough took my advice.
Thank you. Harry.
I can't see you all out there, by the way. They see us.
Infrastructure Week, is that what we're talking about?
It was more than a week, Infrastructure
Well,
Week.
I know with Trump, it was like every 2 weeks was Infrastructure Week or something. The first, Trump 1.0. Okay, one of the things I was telling Claudia before is sometimes I want to answer the question I want to answer and not exactly what she's asking me. So I'm going to be a little bit tangential here, like I normally am. So it's funny, what Chris said, I so agree with most of what he said, but I disagreed with something earlier when he said we need to be more in the center. Most of what I hear, and I know my algorithms, my YouTube algorithms point me towards certain people with certain points of views, is that people are more leftist than moderate. And as an example, I think most of us here would agree with what AOC says rather than MTG. I mean, you know, one is a brilliant young person, and one is basically a Neanderthal who thinks the Gestapo police are after you. You know, the problem in politics is, again, we have disparate kind of interests. I mean, as you know, such a hustler as Eric Adams is, and we all know, I mean, a guy was living in Jersey and running for mayor. I mean, the fact is, like, with DC 37, we never get good raises. People like think, oh, whatever. We got from Eric Adams like 16.2% over 5.5 years. Inflation was 21% over about 4 years. This may be stats might be a few months old. So we fell behind. But we got remote work when he first said no. We got Juneteenth without really a give back, even a mention that we owe him something for that. And so basically, I mean, it's so hard to endorse a candidate because if you go with the wrong horses, I think Chris said earlier, you might be screwed. And someone like Andrew Cuomo kind of can scare you because he's probably going to win. I hope I didn't say that. All right, I apologize.
Don't be scared. Take
okay.
it easy.
Well, you know, but let me go back with Cuomo for a second. 'Cause again, I want to answer what I want to answer, not what the question is. You know, Cuomo pushed forward Tier 6. Those of you that don't like public unions may say, hey, save the city money. On the other hand, Cuomo put out some legislation pre-Janus to protect the unions and to kind of force non-members to pay up and stay in the union. If people don't know, Janus allowed public sector workers to opt out of the union. Before then, whether you were in the union or not, you still paid dues. So, you know, Eric Adams won his election almost 4 years ago, by 7,000 votes. And that was totally due to DC 37, which has 150,000 members and 50,000 retirees. So, again, I go off on tangents. One of my morning drugs is Keith Olbermann, and Olbermann always says, don't blame me, I voted for the sanitation lady. You know, who actually was like a commissioner, a deputy commissioner at DEP where I work. But anyway, that's, you know, but we showed some progressive views in supporting Adrian Adams, and then the guy that won't raise my rent, Mandami, and then Zelnora, whatever. And that I think, really, the younger members really love that. And so that's all I'll say. Thanks.
Thanks.
Can I, and this is not a debate. I don't want to get into a debate, but my organization, again, through the 30s, Harry Van Arsdale and his associates, they fought the gangsters and they fought the communists in the 40s. And we're a strong, progressive trade union. And when the Democratic Socialists, in their mantra, indicated that they wanted to take over 10 unions in New York City, and Local 3 was one of them on the list, that's a real threat. And they recognized pretty quickly that it's a top-down leadership, and they're not going to come into union meetings and rile up the rank and file and somehow, take over your union. But that is a threat, and that is a little extreme for me and for my members, and we wouldn't take that lying down.
Fair enough. By the way, one of my assignments for this
I may not hold
panel-
it against every Democratic Socialist, but there are a few out there that when they're willing to put that in writing, and I read the mantra, I read their objectives, it's socialism. And as a democracy, as a democratic trade union, that's not in the cards for us. We want to make sure people have rights and benefits and jobs and families and everything that America brings here, but not everything's free, and you got to work for it.
But if you have to pick one or the other,
Bring
All
it
right.
on.
All right. Yeah. Things are getting a little spicy. Settle down, fellas. As much as I would love to stay on this topic, we only have about 5 minutes left, which is just enough time for our last question of the evening. We've talked a lot about what's wrong in this moment and all the negatives, but I would like to end the evening on a positive note. I want to ask you all, what gives you hope about this moment, and what opportunities, if any, do you see to build worker power right now? I wanted to start with Thelma-Louise.
Oh, wow. Well, I will say that the youth give me hope in this moment. I did not realize it when I was young, going to protests. We were talking in the green room about Occupy Wall Street and how important those movements were, and communing with like-minded people. And we're set in our ways. We have careers. It's probably not realistic for me to be at a protest getting my face bashed in by the police. But the young people who don't have anything to lose, I think, is our biggest asset in this fight, because the young people see what's going on and they know right from wrong, and they're clearly speaking out about it, and they have nothing to lose. So my hope, God bless Whitney Houston, is with the future.
Thank you. Professor Freeman.
Well, I totally agree with that. I think that's really exciting. I have a colleague who wrote a book about the post-war era called The Age of Acquiescence, and we're not in the age of acquiescence anymore, I think there's a lot of sense of people that, they have to step forward and take charge, and I think they see the labor question, the issue of work and the relations of work and the role of unions as central to the future of the country. That was not true 30, 40 years ago. Unions may have been stronger, but the labor question was not seen as central. I think it is once again. I think that's a very important step forward.
Thank you. Nkosa.
I think the young people, as Thelma said, they know right from wrong. And, when you think about organizing, they may not know that what they're doing by speaking up and protesting and fighting is a form of organizing, but it is, and it makes me think about the civil rights movement, because I feel like we're in that moment again, and I think that they know that they need to get out there and they need to fight for their rights, and I think if they do, we will be all the better for it.
Thank you. Chris, I'm going in a random order again.
I was gonna read this when I got here, and I didn't. I deferred to Josh because there's a little history here, but I am gonna read it real fast because I'm here for a reason. Today, we're here to gather that honor a day that is both rooted in American soil and celebrated across the globe, May Day, or International Workers' Day. It's a day that echoes with the voices of working people from every corner of the world. My grandfather used to say, when are people going to join the human race? A day of pride, of protest, of remembrance, and of resolve. And yet here in the United States, the birthplace of the movement that inspired May Day, we've often let that pass quietly. That contrast is not by accident. It's a story worth telling, and it's a truth worth reclaiming. As we heard, May Day was born in the streets of Chicago in 1886 when hundreds of thousands of American workers rose up to demand the 8-hour workday. They risked their jobs, their safety, and in the tragic case of the Haymarket Square, even their lives. And it was a powerful cry for dignity and fairness, a cry that sparked a global movement. But in the decades that followed, political fear and corporate influence sought to rewrite that story. In the 1950s, during the Cold War, our government pushed May Day aside, branding it a communist holiday and distancing it from the labor movement's proud American roots. In its place, we were given Labor Day, a day to honor labor, yes, but one that too often became detached from the struggle, from activism, and from the ongoing fight for justice. So while workers in Paris and Seoul, Johannesburg, and Mexico march in the streets tomorrow, here in the United States, May 1st remains largely unmarked, but that is changing. And because we remember that May Day is American, it is ours, it belongs to every worker who has stood up and said, we deserve better. And so tomorrow, today, we honor that legacy, and we look forward, because the fight for dignity, for equity, for living wages, for the right to organize and to be heard is not history, it is our present, and it is our future. Let May Day serve as a reminder that the labor movement is not bound by borders and that our solidarity knows no limits. Let us reclaim the day, not as a relic of the past, but as a call of action, a symbol of unity, and a testament to the power of working people everywhere. Thank you, and let's keep building.
Thank you. Harry.
Hard to follow that, huh? And Chris, we'll be duking it out later, right? Okay, well, I'm just going to repeat what other people said, but add a little bit to it. In the unions, it seems like most people are older. I mean, in Local 375, most of the officers are in their 60s, such as myself. It's really nice to see that the younger members who are 30 plus years younger than us seem to be ready to take over soon. I mean, it's not like I'm going to be handing the torch to someone else or someone's going to be handing the torch to me. It's basically, that's an exciting part. And one thing I would like to see with the unions is that, you know, in the old days, we voted for senator, U.S. senator, not by per person, but basically I think a bunch of old white guys would collaborate and vote for who was senator, right? This ended like in the 1920s or something. So basically in the union, a lot of positions, higher up positions, are not voted one member, one vote, but it's voted on by delegates. So essentially unions don't have to please the general membership, they just have to please a majority of the delegates. And that's something that I think that maybe some of the younger members will focus on. You know, DC 37 had a scandal in the late 90s, and one of the recommendations was that you should have one member, one vote, rather than the delegates vote for the head of the union. It's not a knock on the leadership now, but I think that just makes these more democratic. So that's one of the things I'm hoping that maybe the young blood will bring forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Zishun.
Thank you, Chris, for your words about the May Day. I actually want to say something that's opposite to all of you want to say. I actually find a hope in the old people. Because many of the home care workers, they're in their 60s and their 70s, or even older. They work in the homes, right? 24 hours. All day, they're only facing the clients, right? Those who are in very bad condition. They probably don't even know many of the other co-workers, right? So they're very isolated. It's not like in a big factory. But even in this kind of condition, imagine that, even in this kind of condition, very isolated condition, they're able to come together, you know, against all odds, against what the society have been telling them, you know, that they are the happy slaves, that they are, you know, just easily to be bullied, that they're able to come together, the most oppressed able to come together, then it can happen to all of us because they show us what's possible. Many of our young people actually being educated in college, we're actually being told, you know, to just, you know, keep our heads down, you know, just to, to hustle, right? To compete with others, to get ahead, right? To listen to your boss, and to not dare, to fight back, not dare to speak out in your own workplace. But I think through the organizing, actually, we see that the home attendants actually given us a very good example, that we able to come, if we come together, we organize, we can win. And we see that many of the home care workers, I don't say they're old, they're actually young at heart. They're actually younger than many of us young people, who get burned out, who, get too afraid, to speak out. So I think that, we see a lot of energy, from the young at heart, and that, through organizing, actually everyone of us keeping ourselves young, and energized.
Thank you. And on that note, that is all the time that we have for you tonight. Thanks for sticking with us. I know we went about 5 minutes overtime. Thank you so much to our wonderful speakers and panelists. And